All right, everyone. Today we're following up with our Real Households of Fi series, catching up with Kristi and Big ERN, basically rolling out her plan for financial independence and diving in to the ESPP, or Employee Stock Purchase Plan. Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is Choose a Fi. All right, guys, really excited to share this episode with you and follow Kristi on this longitudinal study, increasingly becoming the word of 2020. Everything is so long in 2020. No, longitudinal, though. And to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. Yeah, this should be a really good episode. So this is the 8th of our touchpoint episodes with each of the 8 of these Real Households of Fi. So Kristi, if we introduced her, I guess we had 2 introductory episodes. It was 221 and 224. If you, the listener, are interested in going back and hearing about these 8 different households, and then as we follow them going forward. But just a real quick reintroduction to Kristi. So she lived the standard path. She went to engineering school, and then she actually switched to marketing, but she has a low 6-figure job. And she was just keeping up with the Joneses. She had followed this standard path. She had succeeded in every way. But as she said, she, quote, was waiting to take a breath and enjoy my life. And she was too driven by money. But finding Fi helped her see that money was no longer the goal, but simply a tool. And Jonathan, I love that, right? Like that is the epiphany that is Fi.
This is amazing. Yeah. She is, you can just see, once you have the idea, once you have the direction, it's game on. And you're unlocking flexibility and options all along the way. So I think what we're going to find, as we kind of go through the study, we're going to see tool after tool start to become available. And we're going to see these wins just start to pile up. And just for people listening to this is not binary. Watch how quickly all of the people in the Real Households, all the people are just afforded options. And then let's just find out, what do they do with that? What changes do they make? What changes are you making as a result, maybe, of hearing a very unique tactic or strategy that's going to be dropped in this episode? Are you fully maximizing all the levers that you have available to you? I think this is going to be a fascinating episode and another great part of this series. So we connected Kristi with Big ERN. Now, Big ERN is infamous, maybe, in the financial independence community. He's phenomenal. He's amazing. His website that he's been writing for the last really 4 or 5 years at earlyretirementnow.com basically is the other half of this coin, where we have a lot of people finding and discovering and loving J.L. Collins' Simple Stock series, and ERN makes the case wealth accumulation is simple. It's simple math. Here's what you do. Decumulation is a bear, and not in the stock market sense, but in the sense that there's a lot to it. It's more complicated, and it's worth exploring what that glide path, what that plan should actually look like. So he created in his mind, and I think the world now agrees with him, the ultimate safe withdrawal rate series. Right now, for this conversation, you don't need to have any background in that conversation. I would just say, if you're excited by what Big ERN talks about and you want to go deeper, go check out his site, earlyretirementnow.com. Go listen to the episode that we did with him. Brad, I'm going to impress you right here. Episode 35 of our podcast is the first time that we had him on the show, I believe, and that will introduce the topic to you. And I believe also related to the episode that we're doing today, Brad ERN just recently released an article which will provide some real insight into one of the tactics, specifically the ESPP.
Yeah, that's right. He actually released 2 articles recently, which I just found out. One is an ESPP better than a retirement account? And the other one is an ESPP worth the risk? So I actually wonder, Jonathan, if those articles came out of this conversation with Kristi. So yeah, it's very, very cool.
I mean, to our audience, just so you know, this community is built around you. I mean, just so you know, like, this doesn't happen by accident. It's like you share with us your unique situations and what you're struggling with. And either us on this platform or other people in this community, create resources around that. And that's why this crowdsourcing personal finance is it's a secret to this entire thing. It's what made it easy. Because when you have people like ERN with his incredible background and his experience, really looking at this through a very analytical, objective, non-sales pitch lens. He has nothing invested in the choice you make. He's just looking for truth. What's the best truth for you? over time, this portfolio of content builds out. So use this episode, use all the episodes as a springboard for that next question, and go track down the resources that are going to serve you where you are. And so with that, excited to share this episode. It is worth pointing out that with all of our real households, these are ongoing conversations. So when you hear them refer to a past conversation, this, I believe, is actually the second or maybe even the third time that they have talked. This conversation is going to be extremely valuable for you. But if you hear them refer to a prior conversation, you're not going to find one in our archives. You are entirely caught up as of right now. Okay, with that, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to see you again.
Good to see you too. How are you doing?
Excellent. Yeah.
Good. So last time we had a bit of a hiccup. We recorded a session and there was some technical difficulties. So unfortunately, but also fortunately, we get to do a follow-up session here. So I thought maybe we could just kind of review some of the topics that we talked about last time and maybe talk about some follow-up questions, some things that I've try to take action on in the meantime. That sounds good?
Yep, sounds good. You get 2 for 1.
Yeah, I know. How about that? Okay, so the first big topic that we covered was the 401k plan. And so just for everybody else, some big moves that I made since discovering financial independence concept, I moved my 401k contributions to go into the traditional 401k instead of the Roth, and I started maxing that out. And then I also moved my current mix and my future contributions out of the target date fund that they frequently recommend people be in at when you're in these employer 401k plans, and I just moved it all into the S&P 500. So that was one thing that we talked a lot about last time was I do have the option to self-manage my 401k through Schwab so that I could get a little more picky about, investing in like a total stock market index fund as opposed to simply the S&P 500.
Yeah, so my point last time was that you shouldn't really stress out too much the S&P 500 versus the total stock market. They're extremely highly correlated. I have both funds, and if you look at the return time series over time, it's not really that different. And in fact, probably just recently, probably the S&P 500 might have outperformed a little bit the total stock market index because small cap stocks underperformed a little bit, but it's probably really minor. So my point last time, and I want to stress that again, is that don't focus so much on the index composition. Focus on the expense ratios, right? If you have a 401k plan where you have maybe 0.2% expense ratio in your current fund, and you could move this to Schwab, and they have expense ratios in the 0.03 or 0.02 range, that might be worthwhile to shift. On the other hand, maybe if it's just a 0.01% difference in the expense ratio, maybe you just keep the money where it is. So I'm always afraid about moving these retirement balances. Take the money out of one fund, and then somebody cuts you a check, and that check is in the mail, and it takes some. They take the money out, and then they sit on it for a week, and then they send the check, and you have to take the check and take it to some other location. By the time this is all done and over, you might have missed 1 month of returns in the stock market, which if you missed a negative month, that's good for you. If you missed a positive month, and maybe on average, you should get something like 0.3, 0.4, 0.5% on average. So in order to save 0.01% in expense ratio, but in expected terms, you lose 0.5%, so 0.5%, then it might not be worth it. So look at the difference in exchange in expense ratios, but don't be too penny pinchy about it either, right? So
okay. Do you have like a rule of thumb of what would be a significant difference in the expense ratios?
Again, I mean, if they do something like a very quick transfer, right? I mean, it's basically, or it's an in-kind transfer where the fund just is moved to the same account, to the different account, and it's the same fund. You don't lose anything. Yeah, I mean, then a 0.01% expense ratio per year, yeah, that's already worth it, right? So it really depends on. You have to check with HR. If you were to make that change, do they have some experience in how long it would take? And then look at how many years of savings on the expense ratio would you lose if this is going to take a few weeks to do the transfer in expected terms. Of course, the return might be positive and might be negative. So you never know. You have to look at what's the expected value of that move.
Okay. So one of the other things that I had a question about was the mega backdoor Roth. So since I have some money in the Roth, some money in the traditional, and I've heard about the backdoor Roth and the mega backdoor Roth. Not super confident about these, but I just thought I would check with you on your thoughts around that. Mm-hmm. And I did actually call my HR department, and turns out that we are allowed to make after-tax contributions, so above and beyond the $19,500. Interestingly enough, there weren't super clear answers, surprisingly to me, the HR department on something like this that's probably fairly uncommon. They, had to do a lot of kind of research, and were even going to get back to me at one point. So the max dollar value is still unclear to me what could be contributed above the $19,500. I was told like a percentage limit. They said 9% of your income could be after-tax savings. They also at one point said an additional $19,500, which both of those seem a little arbitrary to me. I know the IRS limit is like $57,000 into a 401k plan. That includes the employer contribution and the employee contribution. So it would be $57,000 less the $19,500, less whatever the employer contribution is. And that seems to be the logical answer to me, but it was somewhat unclear. So that was the first learning is, great to have a Choose FI community and other people to bounce things off of, because even the HR department might not be so clear on some of that. But that is an option. And we talked a lot last time about that versus investing in the employee stock purchase program and kind of the pros and cons around that. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit again.
Yeah. So again, I mean, the appeal of the employer stock purchase plan is that you get a 15% discount, which you have to pay taxes on the discount. So it's probably only, quote unquote, a 10% boost in your return. And that's spread over 2 years because you have to hold your stocks for a minimum of 2 years. Getting a 5% per annum return boost in that employee stock purchase plan, that's a pretty sweet deal. Of course, the disadvantage is that that's your company stock, right? That's very undiversified. It's actually the worst of lack of diversification, right? It's a lack of diversification in your stock portfolio, and then you have the additional correlation that this is your employer, right?
Right.
It's going to be correlated with your bonuses and income and your employment status, for that matter, right? Because if the company goes out of business, you lose your job and your retirement. Mm-hmm. I would probably still do the employee stock purchase plan. And again, I mean, you should never have, you should only have basically this 2 year worth of float of money that's in the stock purchase plan. And after that, you pull it out. and it would be long-term capital gains if you have capital gains. So that still sounds quite attractive to me. If there might also be a limit on the employee stock purchase plan, right? If you hit that limit, then probably you want to do the additional 401k contributions. And the way I understood it is your 401k plan is actually quite nice because they also allow you to do the conversions then, right, while you're still working. So you don't have to wait until you leave. So you do the conversions. And if you do them quickly, then you owe very little in taxes. And then you have $8,800 or whatever. There's either $8,800 or $19,500 in additional Roth contributions. Right? That's worth a ton of money later on in retirement. So that's very attractive too. But again, I always say that don't let the tax. Don't let the tail wag the dog. Right? So I think the asset allocation and expected returns are the primary focus, and then tax considerations. Taxable brokerage accounts are also relatively tax efficient, right? You can defer all of the gains until later. Dividends are taxed at a preferred rate. So it's that plus the 5%. Per annum return boost for 2 years. It's might still be the better way to go.
Okay. And yeah, as you mentioned, I was able to talk to HR, and it sounds like they do allow an in-plan conversion of those after-tax savings to either the Roth 401k or to take a distribution to a Roth IRA. So that would be another thing to consider if I had extra savings above and beyond the ESPP and maxing out all those other things, would be to figure out, where I would want to convert that to either an IRA or in the Roth 401k.
Yeah, and again, it all depends on the expense ratios and how quickly the money lands in the external account. Right? Because there are some providers like Schwab and Fidelity, Vanguard too. They have very low expense ratio funds. So if they beat what you can get in your retirement plan, then you pull the money out. But I've heard from a lot of people that work for smaller companies, and they have, as one example is, somebody told me that there's a S&P 500 index fund, and they charge 0.8% annual fees. And I said, oh my God, that's outrageously expensive. So maybe for larger corporations, they are a little bit nicer. So when I worked for a while, they would subsidize the 401k index funds, right? They said they had zero expense ratio. So that's
okay.
And now I think it's 0.02%, and I could get 0% at Fidelity. Now, am I going to pull the money out and put it into Fidelity to save 0.02% per year? Probably not. I'll just leave it where it is. Exactly for that headache that I talked to you about. Earlier, I'm afraid that the money is sitting in some no man's land or with the U.S. Postal Service for a while, and it's not earning anything.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing that I wanted to mention about my 401k plan, just because this was a learning for me, and so I wanted to share it, was I just put kind of a round number in as my contribution to my 401k plan because they do it by percentage. So it's a little difficult to figure out exactly what the percentage should be because last year's bonus gets paid out this year, so you're not quite sure how much of that is going in. And so it's a little hard to pinpoint exactly the number. But one learning I had was I overshot it because I do know that they will automatically stop the contributions so you don't surpass the 19,500. So that's good. But if you overshoot it and you're not contributing in the last month or two of the year, I will probably miss out on the company match. So that's something I need to go back and look into to make sure that I'm putting at least that percentage in those last couple months so that I get the full company match. So that was just a good learning.
Yeah, that's a common headache, and so some companies, they have what's called a true up. I think there's a HR has a term for it, so that if you run into this problem and your last few months worth of contributions can no longer go in because you hit the 19,500, they will still pay you the matching, because they say, well, if you had contributed all of this equally spread over the year. So again, this is something you have to check with HR if they do that. Mm-hmm. Some companies offer it, some companies don't. And then a lot of people where they work for companies that do this true up, they say, hey, I'm going to front load my contributions. I'm going to do all contributions the first few months of my salary every year. I go 100% contribution until I get the 19,500. And then I do zero for the rest of the year because I still capture everything later, because I want to get the money in as quickly as possible. Right, the longer the money is in, the bigger my returns are going to be over time. And then if you don't have that true up, yes, absolutely, you have to be totally careful. I mean, you basically have to look at what is your range in bonuses and what is your range in salary and salary raises, right? You look at the maximum, minimum, mm-hmm. and then you do whatever is your maximum for the 401k for that year, 19,500. And you do 19,500 divided by the maximum and by the minimum, then that gives you a sense that this is the range of equally distributed 401k contributions over the year that I would get to exactly match the 19,500. And then basically you have to play around. And then once you reach maybe September, October, you have to look towards the end of the year. Is this now too high? Would I run out on my last paycheck or on my last two paychecks? So you'd have to, this is really a moving target. And so if your company doesn't do the true up, you definitely have to do that little calculation in a spreadsheet on a piece of paper. What is my maximum amount of money that I get that is subject to this 401k percentage contribution? What is the minimum, and what is my $19,500 target? And then, so because towards the end of the year, you want to make sure that you still have in my case, it was in order to max out the match, I needed 6% contribution. So I just made sure that I always had the 6% minimum, and then I could play around a little bit and maybe start a little bit higher than 6%, but never so high that I would run out of contributions at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they did mention the true up process, but it was pretty hand wavy. They said it wasn't necessarily a guarantee. So I'll probably look into that a little more, but yeah, good to know.
Yep, very good.
Okay. So the next thing that we talked about in depth last time were kind of the phases of retirement. Mm-hmm. And so I had always thought of it as early retirement and then normal retirement after age 59 and a half, when you can start accessing the retirement accounts. And you put it very nicely in, there's kind of many phases of retirement, especially before and after Social Security kicks in as well, which is something that I hadn't thought too much about. So maybe we can talk a little bit about kind of, I guess I'm most interested in the early retirement phase. That's the first one. And the least clear to me on what you draw from during those years.
Right. So, there are two aspects here, right? One is the amount of money that you withdraw. Right. So there you will have different phases for that. Right. So you could say that, imagine you retire at age 40. Forget about what account you withdraw from, because in the end, money is fungible in some way, not perfectly, but almost perfectly. So you withdraw for the first X years. And so, by the way, until probably age 65, you have elevated health expenditures. So then age 65, you get your Medicare, if that's still around at age 65. Then you might save a little bit in health expenditures. And then maybe either age 67 or age 70, depending on how you want to structure Social Security. Then you get the boost in additional income, and then you can reduce your withdrawal. So so you have already an uneven path in the easiest possible way. So you have a window between age 40 and 70, and then age 70 until age, say, 90 or 95, or whatever you want to set as your maximum retirement horizon. And so that makes a huge difference in your withdrawal analysis, right? I mean, some people say, well, I don't even want to take into account Social Security, so I want to do a 55-year retirement at my current budget. And so you will notice that, if you take into account that 30 years into retirement, you get a little bit of a reduction in your withdrawal. So that makes a little bit of a difference in your safe withdrawal rate. So that's the one part. So this is the pure financial aspect and the safe withdrawal aspect. And then obviously you have the tax aspect, right? So how do you want to structure their withdrawals over time? What accounts do you tap first? Where do you want the money to grow the longest? Where do you keep, if you have different asset allocation, right? So you might have say 75% stock portfolio, 25% bonds. Not right now, but in retirement, I recommend that people don't do 100% equities. So you should have some diversifying assets once you start retirement. Where do you keep the fixed income assets, and where do you keep the stocks? I mean, you could do it easy and you just do the same allocation over all accounts. Then you have a 75-25% portfolio. But there is also some discussion about, well, should you have the bonds in your tax-deferred accounts because bonds create ordinary income, and you don't want to have that in your taxable account. But then also bonds are the lowest expected return assets. So maybe you want to have the stocks in your Roth IRA, which is the most aggressive asset in the most tax advantaged account. So there's all sorts of considerations about that. But so there's that tax aspect, and then on top of that, there's also this whole regulatory aspect, right? I mean, because you don't want to draw on your 401k before age 59 and a half, or you want to do it in such a way that you do the Roth conversions up to that point. So you could do a little bit of tapping your Roth and also rely on your taxable account. And then obviously the tax aspect and this regulatory aspect on what accounts to tap first and how to avoid the penalties for early withdrawals, they obviously go hand in hand a little bit, right? So in order to avoid tapping the 401k, you want to start early and probably do some Roth conversions early in retirement, right? Because imagine you only live off of your taxable account. So our projections were that, you have a pretty sizable taxable account, but that taxable account is not going to last you all the way from age 40 until 59 and a half. Mm-hmm. Right. So let's face the reality. So you will have to rely, and since you don't want to tap the 401k directly, you want to have the Roth conversions. But the Roth conversions are also a very good idea to do anyways, because you want to, at the very least, fill out your standard deduction and do the Roth conversions. And then you already have a little bit of Roth contributions that you can tap tax-free and penalty-free. So I think you should be okay to go all the way to 59 and a half without ever having to tap the actual 401k and potentially pay taxes, or you get into this into this dreaded sufficiently equal distributions from the 401k, which is a bit of a paper trail nightmare to do that penalty free. So it's always best to do this staggering of Roth conversions, so that you will basically you max out your standard deductions. And so you never want to be in a situation where early in retirement you completely avoid all taxes, which you might be able to do if you rely only on your taxable accounts. You'll probably stay below the threshold where you would have to start paying taxes on capital gains and dividends. But then later in retirement, you're going to be hit with the required minimum distributions, and then it's all ordinary income. So you want to equalize this, right? So I think we talked about this last time. The best thing to do is to spread out your tax liabilities the most equally as much as you can, because in the extreme case, you don't want to have 1 year where you pay zero, where you have zero taxable income, and then another year where you have $100,000 taxable income. It's better to have both years $50,000 income, because we have this progressive income tax system where with the $100,000 income, you actually pay more total income tax than if you had just had half the income in both years. So, and this general principle applies here too, right? You want to spread out that tax liability over time. And again, here's my general disclaimer, as I always say. So I think taxes are important, right? I mean, you want to keep your taxes as small as possible. But I think it's probably more than an afterthought, but it's you shouldn't stress out 80% of the time worrying about the taxes. It should be the other way around. Is 80% should be the safe withdrawal rate and the asset allocation and getting these things right. And then, 20%, absolutely 20% of the time you should think about the tax optimization. But don't stress out too much about the taxes, because remember, I think last time we talked about if you have something like a $40,000 retirement budget, right? Somebody who retires today on a $40,000 budget, in the absolute worst possible case, where you actually generate $40,000 worth of ordinary taxable income. Yeah, I mean that could start hurting you a little bit on the federal, and then also in some states on your state taxes. But remember, not all of that $40,000 is really taxable. Some of it is you're withdrawing principal, so you already paid taxes on that. Some of it is capital gains and dividends. So capital gains and dividends for married couples, you only start paying taxes if you have taxable income $100,000 or more. For singles, it's $50,000 or more. So you wouldn't break into that. And then, you would have some part of your budget that is ordinary, that is taxed according to ordinary income taxes. So so that would be Social Security later. But again, Social Security, not all of it is taxable as ordinary income. The maximum is 85%. It could be a lot less, especially for some lower income households. And then obviously 401k contributions, the Roth conversions, they will be taxable as ordinary income. But again, I would be shocked if somebody who has a $40,000 budget today, that they would pay more than $4,000 in taxes. And it's probably less than that. And then if they get it a little bit wrong, instead of $42,600, they pay $42,800 per year in taxes. Yeah, it hurts, but it's not my biggest worry. My biggest worry is that somebody gets their safe withdrawal amount wrong, right? And they instead of withdrawing $30,000, which was safe, they withdraw $40,000. That's a much bigger headache than a few $100s per year in average taxes. Or the other way around, right? They could have withdrawn $50,000, but they live like misers, and they live on $30,000 per year. I think that's a much bigger headache. So this is why I say this 80% should be about the finance, and 20% should be about the tax. But then again, if you ask other experts, right, they say, oh no, it's all about the taxes, because they're the tax experts, and they have the and maybe I have a hidden agenda, and I want to overemphasize my finance background, and I was never much of an accountant and tax expert. So keep that in mind. So maybe you talk to some other experts on some of the tax issues. But again, I mean, obviously, so taxes are important, right? I mean, ignoring taxes completely. Yeah, I mean, that would make quite a big difference, right? I mean, it's probably between 5 and 10% of your withdrawals you have to budget for taxes. But again, that's not really the issue, right? The question is a good tax planning versus all right tax planning. How much of a difference would that make for you? Probably not that much, right? I mean, if we had a retiree who wants to do a $300,000 annual budget, probably they want to do a little bit more careful tax planning, and then they don't talk to me. They will talk to some real expert on this. So I think for most people, really concentrate on the retirement finance, and then the taxes are it's the second in line in the priorities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so this is probably, I think I know the answer to this question, but at any point, should someone consider contributing to their taxable account or something else instead of continuing to pump money into their retirement accounts if they're worried about funding, before 59 and a half, and they have a large chunk of money already in their retirement accounts?
I think I could probably come up with some pathological cases where somebody has absolutely zero taxable, zero in the Roth, and has only a 401k, but is a 401k millionaire or multimillionaire, and then they realize, hey, I could retire now, but guess what? All the money is tied up in the 401k. Probably the last few years before retirement, increase your liquidity on the taxable side. But then again, I mean, that might also be your very high earning years, and you get such a big tax boost out of your 401k. So there could be some pathological cases, for example, where you currently work and live in a low cost and low tax state, right? But in retirement, you already know that you're going to have to move for family reasons to, say, New York or California, and you'll have higher tax liability. In that case, the 401k is not that useful, right? Because the gap between your marginal tax rate retirement versus earning years is not that high. Then in that case, you probably want to diversify a little bit. But for most people who can comfortably assume that certainly on their federal tax return that they'll end up in a much lower tax bracket. Say you go from the 22% tax bracket down to the 10 or 12% tax bracket in retirement. That is such a big jump. I mean, and then on top of that, you already have done all your homework, right? You have a little bit of taxable savings already. You already have enough Roth contributions. Then when you retire, you do the laddering already. So I think for most people, absolutely, you want to max out the 401k for as long as you can.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. That's what I figured. And so to this end, you got me started with a great spreadsheet with some of my information in it. So that was wonderful. And I've looked into that and played with it a little bit. One thing I did do was added the employer 401k match. And with that, I had to make a salary increase assumption. And I think we talked a little bit about this last time, being very conservative with that number. So I use 2%. I don't know. Does that seem reasonable to you?
Yeah, so 2% over and on top of inflation. I think that's for young professionals like you. I think that would be a good assumption. Yeah.
I'm hoping for more, but we'll stick with 2% just to be safe.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I also just kind of continued the spreadsheet out to later in life ages. So I haven't quite wrapped my head around how to factor in the drawdown phase, but this discussion should certainly help. So it sounds like the brokerage account, and then also the Roth contributions, and maybe try to work in the Roth conversion ladder as well.
Right. So again, I mean, this is really just a very incomplete tool, right? Because this is just one spreadsheet, and you have to make some assumptions about the returns, right? So what are the returns? You take some kind of you don't even take the average equity returns. You take the maybe not a worst case scenario, but a not so good case scenario average equity return. So this is why I used 4% real return. So this is 4% over and on top of inflation. So if you assume maybe 1.5% to 2% inflation, so this would assume 5.5% to 6% equity returns. And again, because this is just a fixed return, this is not really a very useful. It's useful for certain things, but it's not useful for other things. For example, because if you assume a 4% return and you withdraw 4% from your portfolio, well, you will never run out of money in this spreadsheet, right? By definition. Whereas in reality, some people run out of money, and this is the whole thing about sequence of return risk, because returns are not equal every year. They could be really low early in retirement. So this is not really a sheet that will help you figure out how much money should you withdraw at what point in time. This is more about the cash flow issues, right? How much money do I have to do in the Roth conversion ladder? Am I going to run out of money in my taxable account before 59.5? Yes, you would if you don't do any kind of Roth conversion ladder business or tapping some of your existing Roth IRAs. So so it's helpful in that sense, but again, it's an incomplete tool because the returns are flat. And so it gives you some information, but it's not the be all and end all. Yeah. And then on top of that, there's also what I always like to do in this environment. So, for example, the way you could model Roth conversions in this spreadsheet is that you assume that you take a distribution from a 401k. So every year you take $20,000 out of the 401k, and then you put it into the Roth, right? So there's a set of columns where you have the withdrawals and the balances. And right now I only see some withdrawals from the taxable account. So you could also do withdrawals and contributions in your 401k and Roth so that they exactly even each other out. And then so it could help you if you add some more columns, and then you every year you calculate for example, your taxable income, right? How much of that is, and by the way, if you take $44,000, for example, out of your taxable account, not all of that is taxable, right? The part of that is the cost basis, and part of it is capital gain. So you have to split that too. So that probably takes a little bit of effort. But so in any case, you could do some calculations on, well, how much money do I want to take out of the Roth? I mean, for example, one thing you could do is if you find out that, for example, you run out in year X, in terms of your taxable account. Well, in year X minus 5, you probably want to have already pretty aggressive Roth conversions so that in year X you will have enough money that you can tap tax-free, right? And so this is how this kind of spreadsheet would work really well. And again, it's always subject to the disclaimer: there is no return volatility in this spreadsheet, right? So this is always an incomplete exercise, but it gives you some information at least.
Yep. Definitely a good starting point. Easier to wrap my head around it when it's visually kind of laid out like that, even if it's not totally the full picture. So.
Right. Oh, and then I think you mentioned somewhere you need to better understand how inflation is taken into account in the spreadsheet. So inflation is taken into account. So when I do these kinds of spreadsheets, there are multiple ways of doing this. So what I did in this particular spreadsheet is I just assumed that everything is already in real inflation-adjusted dollars. So everything is in year 2020 dollars. So in that sense, I assume that every year you contribute only $19,500 pre-tax, because that $19,500, that is adjusted according to inflation, and the same with the health savings account and the Roth. So it's very easy to track that in the spreadsheet because you just keep it at the same number because it is inflation adjusted. And the nice thing about that is sometimes I see people do. There are a lot of ways of messing up your calculation if you work with nominal numbers, right? So you do nominal numbers, and then you forget to adjust your expenses, right? Your expenses would have to be adjusted by inflation. But in this spreadsheet, I don't have to, right? Because as I said, everything is in year 2020 dollars. And then the expenses just stay the same, which means in nominal dollars, they would all be adjusted by, say, 2 or 1.5 or 2 or 2.5% inflation, whatever you want to use. But there are a lot of ways of messing up your calculations if you work with nominal numbers. So I've seen a lot of retirement planning tools where, we do the inflation adjustment. But what people forget is they have to do inflation adjustment twice. Once is the inflation adjustment of your withdrawals. But then also when you look at final dollar values of your portfolio, right, then they say, most of the retirement cohorts ended up with more than they started with. Guess what? That number was not inflation adjusted. So if somebody tells you, in the year 2056, you still have $1 million, well, is it $1 million nominal or real? So if you do this in nominal terms, you would always still have to keep around all of the same columns, but inflation adjusted. Just because I can't even tell you in year 2056 what is $1 million. Well, I could. It's probably around $700,000. I'm just making up that number. But I don't know. Is it $600,000 or $800,000 in today's dollars? I would have to get a calculator. So, and because I can't do that in my head so quickly, I would have to add all of the real columns in that spreadsheet anyways, in order to just get a grasp of, how much is that actually in today's dollar? Because $1 million in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, I don't even know how much that would translate into in today's dollars. So that's why if you all you have to do is you just have to be consistent, right? So and the way I'm consistent is I do everything in real inflation adjusted dollars. But here's one thing I have to do. I have to assume that all the returns are also in real percent, not in nominal percent. So that's why I'm using the 4% equity return, which in nominal terms, that would sound really, really low because equity returns have been much higher than 4%. Now, in real terms, there have been lots of long windows where equity returns have actually sometimes been below 4% inflation adjusted. Again, I don't want to necessarily do it an absolute worst case scenario. I want to do it a slightly conservative scenario where you're a little bit below. I think the very long-term average equity return was something like 6.5 or 6.7% inflation adjusted. And I wanted to give that a pretty good haircut, and that's why I made it 4%.
Okay, great. That helps a lot, understanding that. Okay. The next thing that we talked about, we touched on it a little today already, was the employee stock purchase program.
Yeah.
And so, as I mentioned, this has probably been my largest financial mistake up to this point, because I had no idea, about any investing or anything like that, but I knew I wanted to take advantage of the discount. So since I started working, I had just been taking the full advantage of the stock discount and never selling anything. So my portfolio is very unbalanced currently, but this is the first step, starting to understand all of it and the implications and the mechanics of selling it and everything. So I did take my first step, and I sold my first chunk of company shares. So that was great. I still have a lot remaining, and that was kind of one part of the internal debate, was how much to sell. Of course, I factored in, making sure that I had held them longer than 2 years and that there was a gain on them. I'm assuming that's the best strategy here, to try to sell the low shares. So I did that.
Right. Okay. Okay, that's good. People are choosing, they would say there's a lot to unpack. So let me go. I don't know what company you work for, and probably you don't even want to mention this. So 20 shares doesn't mean anything to me. I mean, I think that because you have more shares than you want, obviously you want to sell more shares today than you put in today as the fresh contributions in your employee stock purchase plan. And then the question is, do you want to do it all at once? Maybe don't do it all at once, because that always creates this feeling of regret, right? So you do the conversion and you sell all your company shares that are older than 2 years, and then boom, the stock price goes through the roof, and you feel, oh my God, that was really bad timing. So maybe you want to do some kind of a transition period over a year and walk down that excess that you have. But yeah, I mean, I would look at how many shares do you have that are older than 2 years, and then start selling them. And so the question is, do you want to sell them all at once or spread it over some time? And then obviously, I mean, every month or every paycheck, or not sure how frequently you contribute to that stock purchase plan, there's more shares coming in, right? So you want to sell not just that big backlog of shares, but also the ones that go into the big pile that is older than 2 years. And yeah, I mean, you have to figure that out. What's a good transition period, and then after that, on an ongoing basis, there might also be some considerations. So, for example, I had a stock purchase plan with my company. I didn't really contribute that much because I only got a 5% discount, which is basically just peanuts. But I think I only had a 6-month holding period. So that's but the 5%, especially after tax, is really only 2.5%. It wasn't really worth the hassle. And I was really happy. It's the stock purchase plan is with Fidelity. Yeah, Fidelity is great. I mean, they have really low commissions. And then because I think at that time it was $4.95. Now it's actually 0 commissions. turns out I sold the shares in the stock purchase plan, and then I got hit with the 1995 commission. And I said, well, what's going on here? They said, oh, yeah, I mean, the 495, that's only for just regular brokerage accounts. So for the employee stock purchase plans, by the way, we have different commissions, and they are negotiated with your employer, and this is what they negotiated with us. So it's 1995. So there could be higher commissions on selling this. So maybe you don't want to do the sales every single month. You might actually almost wipe out a lot of your gain with that. So maybe do it less frequently just for that reason, because there could be very stiff commissions involved in that employee stock purchase plan. So check that out, what the commissions are for that. And then, I wouldn't really stress out about what lots to sell first, right? Because right now you have, so everything that's older than 2 years, you have some lots that are at a loss. Some of them are at a gain. Hopefully, most of them are at a gain. The good news is that because they're all older than 2 years, they will all be long-term gains. Right? So you don't have to worry about the tax situation quite as badly as if they were short-term gains. So since eventually you want to sell all of them anyways, I think don't stress out over what to sell first, especially if you say, well, you have a lot of this and you want to sell it off all in the next 6 months. I would actually do the opposite. If you want to do a little bit of tax arbitrage, I would do the opposite, right? I would sell off the ones that are at a loss, because that is something that you can use as, it's called tax loss harvesting. Right? You can write that off against other capital gains, or you could write it off even against your ordinary income up to $3,000 a year. Again, I don't think you should stress out over it. You could do a little bit of tax arbitrage where you sell off all of the short-term losses before the end of the year. And if you don't have any other short-term gains or even long-term gains for this year, you could write this off against your taxable income. And there again, we go into this whole tax arbitrage thing, which is, I hate to do that. I'm more of a finance guy, not a tax guy. And then actually the very low cost shares with the highest capital gains, you want to defer them as long as possible, which is, I actually think that that's the one tax hack that I certainly want to do when I get to this point, when I have to sell shares in taxable accounts. We're not yet in the position we actually have enough income in our retirement right now, but if eventually we have to liquidate some of our stock index funds, I definitely, in my personal retirement, I want to sell the ones with the highest cost basis and the lowest tax bill. And the reason is I want to get there is a little bit of a tax arbitrage to begin with, even if we eventually liquidate all of our shares, because I want to defer taxes for as long as possible. I want to pay taxes later rather than early. So there's a time value of money consideration there, and then on top of that, eventually, my wife and I, when we are gone, we're going to leave our taxable accounts to our daughter. And if there's still money left, I want the lowest cost basis, the highest capital gains shares to go to our daughter, because at least right now, the tax laws are such that if our daughter inherits that account, she resets her cost basis to the value at the time of our death. So her capital gains are basically forgiven at that time as a one-time present. And if she keeps them and she gives money to her kids and she never sells them, then she again gets that step up basis. So there's a real tax hack in that sense, if it stays, right? If it could always go away if the federal government gets desperate enough to tax people. But at least according to today's tax laws, there's a little bit of a tax hack that it doesn't really apply to you, because I mean, obviously the way your employee stock purchase plan so it applies to you, generally to your taxable accounts. It doesn't really apply to your employee stock purchase plan, because you have this urge. Eventually, you sell everything, right? And you will never want to hold anything for longer than 2 years. But for your general taxable portfolio, you have the same consideration. You want to sell the ones with the lowest capital gains tax implication first, and let the low cost basis shares run the longest. And maybe in the end you're going to sell them, but you still have a little bit of a tax arbitrage because you pay the highest tax bill later. And then if maybe you don't even need the money, and you eventually bequest it to your kid or kids, they get that step-up basis, and it's effectively forgiving the income tax on the capital gain. So there is a rationale of liquidating shares at a loss first, and then the ones with the gains, the ones with the smallest gains first. So. That's the general rule, and I think you proposed it the other way around. So I would reverse that. But again, for the stock purchase plan, it's probably not going to make that big a difference, because eventually you want to liquidate everything anyways, very quickly.
Okay. Well, that's a good understanding. That I did that the wrong way. I think also our company stock has been very volatile, so. I know I shouldn't be doing this, but in the back of my mind, I'm kind of trying to time the market a little bit and hoping that the shares that I have that are at a loss will eventually be no longer at a loss. But like you mentioned, if I'm going to sell them all, then maybe it's not too much of an issue.
It's a big problem. Oh no. So again, it's a big problem. People have loss aversion, right? People sit on losing shares or losing lots and wait for them to recover. It's a common behavioral bias that people don't want to admit failure, and but sometimes it's just best to cut your losses. And my internet connection is unstable. Oops. So sometimes it's best to just cut your losses and let go, and sometimes use the tax benefit. And so it's a temptation to, yes, I want to wait until they recover, but it's actually there's some tangible benefit of selling the losing shares first. So.
Okay.
But let's move on to the next issue.
The last topic was about the HSA. We talked a while about my kind of concerns in the back of my mind about what if the rules on the HSA change, and I've stashed all this money away and started investing it and not using it for medical expenses, which we talked kind of about the possibilities around that.
Yeah, so I mean the health savings account is a pretty awesome account, right? Because it's a triple tax advantage. Money goes in, you don't have to pay income taxes on the money that goes in. The money grows tax-free, and the money comes out tax-free. So it's a combination of a 401k and a Roth IRA, right? 401k, you don't pay taxes up front, money grows tax-free, but then it gets taxed. And the Roth also has 2 out of the 3. You tax it first, but then it grows tax-free and you withdraw tax-free. And the health savings account has all 3 tax-free. So it is a very attractive account. Now, of course, the problem is that it only works if you actually use the money for health expenses, right? So you have to be cautious about not overfunding your health savings account. But if you assume that, look, I mean, my personal lifetime health expenses are going to be X, and you keep your health savings account below that. I think then it's real good. Is a real good financial planning tool, and use this health savings account as a quasi retirement account, which basically means that if you have health expenses right now, you don't use your health savings account, right? You just keep the receipts. You pay it out of pocket and let the money grow. And then eventually, if you do need some money, you can use this year's or last year's or 3 years ago medical expense receipts to withdraw money from your health savings account. So you can use the past receipts. And then, of course, at some point, you will get to an age where your expenses are high enough where, you probably use your current year health expenses to withdraw from that health savings account. So I think it's a pretty sweet deal, and I would use it as long as it is around. And we talked last time a little bit about, but what if the rules change, right? The rules normally, at least in this country, where they take rule of law more seriously than elsewhere in the world, the way rules change in this country, it's usually not backdating the rule. So it is usually so we change the rules now, and then everything that goes into your health savings account starting in year 2021 or 2022, the new rules will apply to that. The old rules will always apply to the contributions you made to your health savings account. Again, there's never any perfect guarantee, right? Could there be some politicians who say, hey, guess what? I mean, in the future, we're just going to tax withdrawals from the health savings account. So we make a health savings account the same as a 401k, basically. It's a possibility, but I think it's a low probability. I'm worried about higher taxes in the future, and there's some uncertainty about how they manage that. But I think it will happen just through the regular tax code. They raise the tax rates, and that's it. And so we have a health savings account, but it's actually so small that we have little worry about that will max out that health savings account, and that will pay for maybe 1 or 2 years of health expenses when we're 70 or 80 years old. So I'm pretty confident that we can use that. In your case, I mean, you have a pretty substantial amount already, and you contribute something like the $7,000 every year. I would monitor. I would probably not let the health savings account grow to more than maybe 15% of your total net worth. Because you look at how much do we spend on average in the economy on health expenses I think it's about 15%, something like that. So maybe keep the health savings account to less than 10 to 15% of your portfolio, and you should be okay.
Okay. How long is too long to hold on to your receipts before you kind of reimburse yourself, do you think? Is there a limit on that?
No, you have to hold on to your receipts forever, basically, until you take them. So imagine in 20 years, you finally start tapping your health savings account, and then you start using your receipts all the way back from 2017, 18, 19, 20. Mm-hmm. You obviously have to hold on to your receipts until the year, say, 2040, And then on top of that, probably the 7 years, the number of years you have to hold on to your receipts and your tax returns. I think there's a certain time window when you can still get audited. And yeah, I mean, absolutely, you have to hold on to the receipts. So this is why I hold on to receipts in digital form. And as in paper form, obviously, I mean, it's not like I'm going to throw them away, but I hold on in PDF format. And then they are in PDF format on my computer, on an external hard drive, on another external hard drive that's in a safe in our house, on a cloud backup service, and on my own little cloud backup service in our home. So, but even if the whole home were to blow up in a big fire, I would still have the cloud backup of all those documents. And yeah, I mean, you want to hold on. I mean, they are worth real money eventually.
Yes. Yep. That's the part that's always made me a little nervous, is going in 20 years from now and pulling out some old receipts, but hopefully that works out.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that is all the topics that I think we wanted to get through. So, yeah, thank you again for meeting with me twice. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, very good. I mean, yeah, I think your finances are in great shape, and I think you're on a good path, and I think you'll have a comfortable early retirement. I can't guarantee you what exact year it's going to be. It's going to be early. It's going to be probably earlier than my retirement, and you'll do really well. So
great. That's a great note to end on.
Okay, Brad, I am looking at the notes that you took based around this episode, man, and you have a lot of TLDRs here. There's a lot of takeaways for our audience.
Yeah, there really are. And it's amazing to see Kristi taking action already. That's what's so cool, is, like we said, just between the couple of conversations she's had with ERN and learning about FI, et cetera, she's making moves, right? She's already maxing out her 401k. She moved all of the funds in her existing 401k to an S&P 500 index fund instead of a target date fund. And what was kind of cool was ERN said, don't stress between the S&P 500 fund and the total stock market index fund, because they are substantially similar. They really are. When you look at returns and basically the makeup of those funds, they really are very, very similar. In fact, Warren Buffett, as I've quoted a bunch of times here, he's mentioned that he plans to leave his estate, certainly, and 90% of the funds he's directed to put into a Vanguard S&P 500 index fund. So, that's straight from Warren Buffett. We obviously, Jonathan, talk about the total stock market index fund, but they really, really are substantially similar. And really, the big takeaway that ERN said is focus on the expense ratios. Right? That's the expenses. That's what matters over decades. So the target date fund, sure, that's a nice little concept, I think would be the argument. But is it really going to outperform the S&P 500 or the total stock market index fund enough to justify the expense ratio difference? And I think ERN would probably argue no.
It's interesting. A lot of those target date funds, they aren't. Yeah, and I don't have it written down what her expense ratio was, but a lot of them, especially the Vanguard ones, they're not particularly unreasonable. But it is interesting how hard it is for me personally to get excited about a target date fund. It's not that there's anything wrong with it per se. Well, let's be clear on this. There's a big difference between a target date fund 2030 and a target date fund 2060, 2070 and beyond, right? So like not all target date funds are created equal. Like if you were to pick a target 2030 because, hey, I want to be retired in the next 10 years. No, my friend. That is going to disproportionately put you into a super conservative portfolio, and that's probably not what you had in mind. And so I like the idea of, instead of just seeding everything to an algorithm who's, I don't know if I would agree with their math without really having vetting it and agree with their choices. When you understand the simple path, and again, pointing people to an old episode, go to episode 19 of our podcast with J.L. Collins in the stock series. Big ERN, Big ERN would also say, that is a very good approach to build lasting wealth. It's understandable. It makes sense for 99% of the population. You should just stay there. Just do that. And even over a target date, because there's a pretty simple way as you get closer to retirement. Maybe you're within 5 years, maybe you're within 3 years. There's a pretty simple way to start easing yourself in to a more conservative portfolio, but you get to make the choice, as opposed to, what did 2030 have in mind? What did 2040 have in mind? That sort of thing. And that's aside from the whole expense ratio situation. So I guess my big takeaway is it's interesting, and I appreciate greatly that Big ERN, with as optimized as he is, and this is a guy that's not afraid of maybe, having some options in play, maybe dabbling with a few individual stocks, maybe like he's, all these different types of things. He's dabbled with all of them, but he's telling you, for your friends, for your family, unless you are like just living and breathing and you want to try this stuff from a place of, extreme understanding of what the risk scenario is for you doing that, 99% of the population should just be in a total stock market index fund or a S&P 500 fund. Like, that's good enough for me. I know I was tempted to get more complicated with it, and Big ERN talked me down, basically, just by the episodes that he's had on the show. So, and the last thing, Brad, that I think we should highlight for people, and we prefaced it at the beginning by pointing people to Big ERN's article, which will be linked in the show notes. Everybody, as a springboard, if they have this and they want more information, should go check out those articles, was the employee stock purchase plan. And Brad, this is a phrase that you have said many, many times to me privately, offline, and on the show. Don't let the tax tail wag the dog. And I'd love for you to, one, explain why that's pertinent here, and then two, what your takeaways on this topic were.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And yeah, I love that quote by ERN. Don't let the tax tail wag the dog, right? So many people just reflexively hate paying taxes, and that drives their decision making, often and most times to their detriment. I think that's the argument here, is you're supposed to make the best move that impacts you positively over the long run. And if a consequence of that is paying tax, then so be it, right? So I've actually heard, and I think this is the example that I've mentioned to you, Jonathan, so many times. I've actually had people say to me like, oh, I need to have a mortgage. I need to pay interest on my mortgage so I can get the tax deduction. And that's like saying, for most people, especially with the new standard deduction being so high, most people are not itemizing their deductions, right, on their 1040. So for most people, that mortgage deduction is worth zero. So you're willing to pay $1 in interest for 0 cents of benefit. But even, giving them a little bit of credit and saying, okay, maybe you get 15 cents. So that means you're willing to take $1, split it up into 85 pennies and 15 pennies. You get 15 cents of that back, and you're burning the other 85. Like,
I got the deduction. I got that winning.
But I showed them, right? I showed them I'm not paying the taxes. It is just utter lunacy, in my opinion.
Now, let's balance that out for people, just for context. Brad and I both are maintaining our mortgages, and so it's not just that this was not it's just saying, it's just understanding why and what your reasons are. And if your sole reason to keep the mortgage is a deduction that you're not benefiting from anyways, then that's the wrong way. Now, if you're saying, all right, well, I actually contribute a significant percentage of my income to charitable donations, and in the absence of my mortgage, I have to donate way more before I get the deduction, now you're starting to make a compelling case. You're thinking through this the right way, but make sure you're very, very clear. The point is not to get a deduction to get a deduction. It's to bring home more income, or allow yourself to save more over the long term. So just the deduction by itself doesn't mean anything.
Yep. That is the perfect analysis, Jonathan. So yeah, you nailed it. And so, I think
Brad,
that's just kind of
I feel like, as being around you for now 4 years, like I've gone from like wanting to know about tax law and like just saying a bunch of stuff that was almost right. It's like more often you're telling me, good job, Jonathan. You nailed it. That we can.
Yeah, you have, learned an incredible amount.
Do you remember year one, Brad, were like, you can't say that. We're going to have to edit that out. That's just not right.
That is completely factually inaccurate.
He can be taught.
Oh man, but yeah, just kind of going back to the ESPP. So earns takeaway here. So these programs or these plans, oftentimes the employee gets a discount on purchasing the stock of that company. So in this case, it looks like Kristi is getting about a 15% discount. And then, again, you do have to pay taxes on it. So Earn was saying it's going to be somewhere around a 10% discount, which is still, it's free money, right? But the counterpoint is Earn does not like having really all your eggs in one basket, where your employment is tied to this company and then your retirement is tied to this company, because a significant proportion of your wealth is just truly in that one basket. So his advice to Kristi was to sell as soon as you can on this stock. So it sounded like from the conversation that she had a 2-year holding period before she could sell it. That was what I gleaned. I don't know if that's 100% factual, but it sounded like it certainly. So it sounded like she sold the first portion of that after that 2-year holding period. And as Earn also said, you get the preferential long-term capital gains treatments since you've held the stock for more than a year. So it's doubly beneficial in that regard. So that, again, is where smart tax advice comes in, right? Like, you don't want to sell this, though she couldn't have, but just in most cases, if you can wait, if you've got a gain and you can wait until you hit that 1-year mark and get the long-term capital gains rates, you absolutely want to do that. So yeah, I think this was great advice from Earn, just from that holistic, let's look at your finances. You don't want this much concentration with your employer.
Yeah, and I think one thing that people probably would get hung up on is that this is a rolling if what you gleaned is it's the 2-year one, it's a rolling 2-year period. So I could see somebody listening to this saying, but what if they allow me to purchase it every quarter, every 6 months, or once a year? Does that mean that I have to wait 2 years from when I leave the company, or 2 years from the last time I contribute? No, if you think about these are effectively lots of the stock that you have purchased. And once that lot matures, so you purchased it at the beginning of 2017 or 2018, 2 years after that purchase, you can then roll that lot over. But then when you purchased it the next time, maybe that's still inside the maturation window. Maturation. I'm going to roll with that one. I feel like it's close enough.
Okay. Sounds good
right.
to me.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So anyways, and that's fine. You see that it's kind of actually the same principle when you're talking about selling you just forget employee stock purchase plan. It's kind of the same thing with short-term and long-term capital gains. As you get closer to needing to draw down, one of the techniques you would then start to look at is, can I sell based on my lots? Or is the platform that I'm using to sell my net worth, does it make these smart decisions for me, where it's going and selling first things that are at the long-term capital gains rate versus the short-term capital gains rate? That's worth pointing out, as opposed to first in, first out, which would be unnecessarily expensive. All right, guys, I bet you there were aspects of this that, like, you crushed it and you're like, oh, I know what to do now. And there were others that you're like, I need some context. I need some follow-up. I'd like to go deeper. Or maybe you're like, what is financial independence? Let me encourage you guys to start at the beginning, right? And what does that look like? It just looks like getting started on your path to financial independence. We've put all of our resources together for you in one place to make this as easy as possible. And to get started on your own path to financial independence, it's just go to choosefi.com/start. Go ahead and get on our email list. And over the next several weeks, we are going to send you bite-sized pieces of information to help you discover the content that we put together in the order that we think it'll be the most beneficial to you. You don't need to be overwhelmed by 300, 400 episodes. At some point, sure, you love the content, you're enjoying it, you work your way through them, but don't put that on you right now. Don't put 400 episodes keeping you from understanding what you need to do. Instead, just go to choosefi.com/start. If this episode was helpful, share it with a friend, a family member, and remember, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled. Start it up.